First of all, for those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Mike Holbrook, and I'm the superintendent here in Hamilton City Schools. And welcome to Garfield Middle School, and thank you for coming out this evening. And at the end of this meeting, we will be entertaining some questions, but the point of this meeting tonight is to provide some information on something that has becoming a bigger and bigger issue with public schools, and that is the EdChoice voucher system. And this year is the first year that the state of Ohio started with EdChoice voucher in a sense that schools are now being, and public school budgets are now being impacted by the EdChoice voucher system. And by the time we're done with this, I want you to understand the impact of that. Let me make this really clear, and this is the stance of our Board of Education, myself, our administration, and our staff. We encourage parent choice. Every parent should have a right and a choice on where to send their child to school. And so this is not about us saying that parents and kids should not have choice. But what we would say is that that choice should be equal across the board. Right now, the EdChoice program is not only a problem in Hamilton, but also throughout the state. And we're going to talk about two different components or sides of EdChoice. One of them is the academic side, and I'll speak to that. The second side is the funding side, and our treasurer, Mr. Hancock, will speak to the funding side. The first piece of information that I think is extremely important is the EdChoice program and how you become eligible to be an EdChoice school for this current school year uses data from 2012-13, 13-14, and 17-18. This year in Hamilton, we have one school that is designated as an EdChoice school, and it's Hamilton High School. Part of the reason for that is graduation data from 2012-13. Those students are 25 years old. Those students aren't even in our buildings anymore and haven't been for a number of years. That is one of the data points that is being considered on whether or not you were, quote, a failing school. This year, in the state of Ohio, 135 districts are impacted. There is roughly 610 school districts in the state of Ohio, to give you a perspective. 483 buildings in the state of Ohio are impacted, and 3 districts in Butler County are impacted. Hamilton has one school that is an EdChoice voucher eligible school. Lakota local schools have 3, and Middletown have 4. So we have a total of 8 buildings in Butler County in which those students that attend various buildings in those districts are EdChoice eligible. And I think that's important to hear because I want to show you what happens next year. Next year, you can see the 3 data points being used. One of those is still 7 years old, 2013-14. But the number of schools, or the number of school districts increased from 135 to 426. 426 out of 610 school districts have at least one building that has been identified as a failing building in their district. So 70% of all public school districts in the state of Ohio, roughly, have a minimum of one school building. We go from 483 schools to 1,209. And 8 Butler County districts are now impacted as opposed to 3. And you can see the number of buildings within each one of those districts. Edgewood has 1 building, Fairfield 7, Hamilton 6, Lakota 8, Middletown 10, et cetera, et cetera. So we go from 8 eligible buildings in Butler County to 36, or 32, 36. The eligibility to apply for an EdChoice scholarship. If you are in an area, if you reside in an area that has a school that is EdChoice eligible. For instance, next year Ridgeway is an EdChoice eligible elementary. If you reside in the Ridgeway attendance zone and you send your student to Ridgeway, your building qualifies. If you live in the Brookwood attendance zone, your building would not qualify because Brookwood is not an EdChoice school for next year. But if you are a high school student, you never have had to attend a public school a day in your life, and you never have had to attend Hamilton High School, and yet you're eligible for the EdChoice Scholarship. Let me repeat that. You never would have had to attend high school in our buildings or any building in our district. Our contention is this: if you are an EdChoice school and we are going to be paying vouchers for you to attend a private school, then we believe that the same accountability standards that we have should be held by the private school. If I'm a parent and I want to shop for the best school for my child, I need to have all the data available in order to make a prudent decision. Right now, we're making a huge assumption. How can you tell me with any type of statistical data that the private school of choice is outperforming the school that has been deemed failing? We don't know. There is no data for private schools. They have their own set of academic standards, and they're certainly entitled to do that, but they are not set forth by the Ohio Department of Education, and it's completely random as to what they are. I don't know how much they've grown kids in a year. I don't know their gap closing. And the reason I bring those items up, those are some of the very triggers that identify a school as an EdChoice school. So if our monies are going to pay for vouchers, wouldn't it make sense that the academic standards are consistent on both sides of that so that you can make an informed decision as a parent? And I think that that's really important. If I'm going to look at my two boys and I'm going to have to make that decision, I'm going to gather all the data that I can. And I'm going to look at that and I'm going to make a decision that's best for my boys. And right now you have data on one side, and on the other side you don't have any of that data. And I think that's an important piece. Entrance criteria. Public schools have, or private schools have a selective entrance criteria. They do not have to accept anyone that enrolls. They can select. And that's not a criticism. If I don't have certain services, I certainly am not going to enroll that student. If I don't have interpreter services, I'm probably not going to enroll a student that has difficulty speaking English. If I don't have certain services, it doesn't make sense to enroll a student that has significant learning disabilities. And we understand that, and we certainly provide those services in Hamilton City Schools. And I understand the other side of that. If I don't have the services, I can't enroll that student. But in many cases, those are some of the most significantly challenging students academically to work with, and monies and services from this program are going to be taken from the public school and diverted, which now becomes even a more challenging situation to serve many of those students. Fiscal impact. There's some significant fiscal sides to this, and I'll come back and kind of give you a summary, but I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Hancock at this point.
Thank you, Mike. For those of you I have not met, I'm Bob Hancock, treasurer for the school district. Been here, my 27th year now. The EdChoice scholarships, they're in two different ranges. First of all, K to 8, you have up to $4,650 per student. And at the high school level, it's $6,000 per student. For us, for this school year, the high school is the only one that's eligible. And so it's $6,000 per student. There were about 140 students there, and it had an estimate of $840,000. If you go out and look right now, the actual deductions, $835,095, so our estimate was pretty good. Now, of those 140 students, 125 of them never been in Hamilton City Schools. We're not on my ADM count last year. Got absolutely no funding. Let's talk about the other 15. And I'm going to claim I got no funding for them as well because we were under the situation of being on a cap, meaning they do a calculation, and they call it a formula, but they couldn't fund the entire formula, so it was short by about $2.5 million. So you pull those 15 kids out from last year, I'd have got the same exact number. So they're not generating any dollars either, and that's the issue we have here. They're not providing any additional funding for these 140 students that are coming through, and we're going to talk why that's the case here in just a minute. The overall impact grows to over $2 million a year. The reason it grows is because we're going to have the 4 elementary schools next year, and we're predicting how they are going to start rolling through. And where that really hits you is the kindergarten class, because the kindergarten class is just like the high school, because obviously the kindergartners have never been to school in our district. So they all qualify. So we're estimating 50 kids a year, and then 50 next year. Well, you still got the 50 from the previous year, so now you got 100 and 150, 200. Put a few more kids in there, about 5%, because they're going to flow through in the other grades and figure out how to get in there. So real quickly, we get up to $2 million a year, a $7 million impact over 4 years. No funding for it in that forecast. The numbers continue to grow. This is not just a Hamilton problem. And we've been working on this since late August, early September. As I started to work through the forecast and put these things together, I quickly noticed that we have a number now. We do not have a formula. The state legislature, when they went through the state budget, they suspended the formula, went away from it. They gave us something called wellness dollars. And they talked about how great that was and all the great things we could do with these wellness dollars, spend it in these 11 different categories, but we're not going to give you any increased funding for your basic needs. So the false assumption they made was that 613 districts in the state of Ohio for the next 2 years have absolutely no inflationary cost increases. And that's ludicrous. We all do. So we are looking at those dollars, how we will spend them. We're spending $5 to $6 million a year in those categories right now. So we'll be using those dollars for that purpose. But overall, next year I anticipate this number to go to $100 million. This year, the $35 million, that's a $35 million increase from last year in EdChoice deductions statewide. We've done the data dump from ODE a couple times, and the number just jumped to $35 million last week. So we continue to look at that, and that's why we want to educate people on it. Again, it's not just a Hamilton thing. In fact, next year, we become the 4th impacted district in the county. We have 3 other school districts, Fairfield, Middletown, Lakota, all will have more deductions next year than we do. So again, it's just not us. If a student gets the voucher in kindergarten, they can keep that voucher all the way through graduation, provided they're in the private school. Doesn't matter how much our building improves. We could have the best building in the state. They continue to get that voucher. Patently unfair. So that could be up to $65,000 for every student that gets it in kindergarten over a career. Again, as I was talking to you, the state basic aid is the exact same number as it was last year. And that's just over $77 million in this district. We're the 18th largest district in the state of Ohio. So is that a big number? Yes, and it should be, because there's over 9,500 students in this district. So a per pupil allocation no longer exists. We're going to talk about that right afterwards. There is a document about 3 pages long in your packet where we speak to just this specific issue.
Bob, can I interject?
Sure.
One of the things that's really important to understand, 77% of all the monies that we receive in Hamilton City Schools are from the state budget. So only 23% of our budget is from local property taxes. The reason I bring that up and the reason that's really important is that we are really volatile to any legislative changes with state aid because of the impact of over 3/4 of our entire budget is directly related to the state budget. So a lot of districts, that's proportional the other way. For us, any change with the state funding certainly has a major impact with us because, like I said, over 3/4 of all dollars that we receive is through state funding. I think that's important. I think we missed that yesterday at the City Council meeting that we needed to bring up.
So what we want to go over with you next is, what have we done? I've been in enough of these meetings throughout the years that I know I would get that question from somebody in the audience. I could actually name the person who would ask me that question. They're sitting here tonight. And that's a good question to ask. What have you guys been doing? We've met with Senator Coley and Representative Carruthers. She was via phone, and Mike and I did that a couple months ago, where we sat in his office. We went over all these issues with him at that point in time. I will say we were not pleased with that meeting. The next thing we did, as I started looking at these estimates, I realized it was much bigger than Hamilton. I asked the Ohio Department of Education, would you give me this specific information? They've been very good. They've provided me 2 or 3 different data dumps where they give me specific data for each school district in the state of Ohio. It takes me 2 or 3 hours to pretty it up and do some sorts on it. And what did I do with that information? I sent it out to all the school districts and started getting their attention as to what was going to happen to them. Now, they weren't quite believing it at first because it is kind of ludicrous. And the deductions didn't actually start till the second payment in October. So I kind of had to have that happen. And when it did happen, then the phone really started ringing and people were realizing that this is real and we didn't get an increase, but yet we are losing money. In fact, I talked to one district, I did this list, and I had a district called, it was Parma, and they're at like $2.2 million. Of the new districts this year, they get the highest increase, I believe. And I called him up and I said, are you really looking at the school choice stuff? Any knowledge of it? And he goes, oh yeah, my superintendent told me, not a problem, that's a new program, the state's gonna pay for it out of their specific line item. And I said, well, I'm sorry to inform you, and unfortunately, that's not the program they're talking about. And that district was right in the midst of negotiations. We had a meeting with, again, another meeting with Senator Coley, Representative Carruthers. We also had Representative Keller there. We had the Butler County Treasurer's superintendents. And we, again, provided additional information in that meeting. That meeting was a little more candid and a rather interesting meeting. Again, I won't say that we were necessarily happy with the outcome. Then we presented last week, I believe it was, to, again, at the Educational Service Center, we invited a couple board members, superintendent, treasurer, and finance people, finance committee members from school districts, Butler County and some in Hamilton County that are significantly impacted. And we had 50 in the room, and we had a good discussion for an hour and a half there. From that, I've since been appointed to a steering committee with what I call the alphabet groups, the Ohio Association of School Business Officials, OSBA, and a couple others. And we've met a couple times, been spending a little time in Columbus. We've communicated with various city leaders, and then we had the presentation last night with council. And then right after we had that meeting a week ago Wednesday, Mike really jumped on this, Mr. Holbrook, and he did a presentation. I actually got a document together in just a few hours that next morning while I was in Columbus on the steering committee stuff. And he went out and did 6 different presentations that day. Half of them with our staff, half of them with our parents at the high school that evening. So he's been out there beating the bushes, trying to get the word out. We continue to have a lot of conversations with, and particularly Mr. Holbrook, with the 2 legislators. And so what is the solution? And the solution is we want our money back. That's the first thing that has to happen. You cannot be deducting money from school districts at a point in time when you abandon the formula and you're not providing any per pupil funding increases. That just doesn't work. It's unethical. It's immoral. The second thing we would say, that private schools, if you're going to accept the money, you've got to play by the same rules. And that makes sense on so many levels. And most importantly, on the comparative level, how are these parents, again, going to know what education their students are getting in these private schools unless you've got the same data to compare to? And then 3, the state of Ohio, the metrics, and Mike can speak to this, the metrics are messed up. Doesn't make sense. Like you said, running 41 students from the hurricane, none of them passed. Why would that be held against you? We have 20 students or so that are special ed that get to stay until their 22nd birthday by law, don't graduate by the time you're 18, that's held against you. Well, why would you hold that against a district when you require it by law? They need those services. And then you also have probably 20 or 30 students a year that are credit deficient. You know, they come in their junior year, they got 5 or 6 credits. You really expect them to get 22 credits in a year and a half? Not going to happen. So there needs to be some common sense, especially on this graduation rate stuff. Let's take a minute and go to that page. I'll steal yours for a minute. I think that's the one I want. Yeah, that's the one I want. You'll find a piece that we wrote just a couple days ago, because Mr. Holbrook was in my office late in the day, and we were talking. He goes, you know, Bob, that people aren't buying into the fact we're not getting a per pupil increase. Nobody believes it. And I go, well, that's what we need to write then. And so this is what came of it. And the example here, and I'm not going to read this to you. You guys can do that at your leisure. But this is not Hamilton. I just did a round number. Suppose you're a district of 75 million. You get that number last year. That's what you received. You get it the next 2 years. But all of a sudden, last year you didn't have any EdChoice scholarships. That's us. This year you got 900,000. Next year we got some other things going on. All of a sudden it's 1.35 million. Again, it's a fictitious district. It's just illustrating what happens to you. You're not getting any additional funding, but you are getting the deductions. So your money available to you does go down. So I did that for kind of like a case study of one district. But when you get into the smaller print on the second and third page, what I've done is I've gone out and I've cut and pasted right out of the Ohio Department of Education the payment information that I receive twice every month. And I can go out there and sort it a certain way, and I can find out what's the deduction for scholarships, for EdChoice scholarships. And the first one, 148.6 million, that's the one that just happened. Actually, it's going to happen in the next couple days. That's for December 13th. The next one happened in November. The November number 2 was 148.1 million. So you can see changes are still occurring. Our number stayed the same, so I think we're good as to where we're going to be. But across the state, that number's still growing a little bit. But look at the number last year, 113.4 million. That's where you get your $35.1 million increase this year. And those districts, by and large, did not get any money for their students. It'd be very little. In very few cases did they get the money. And that is what the state needs to really address. They need to be paying the bill for that. And they need to think about what that number is going to be next year. Because I fully believe when we go from 400 and some buildings this year to over 1,200 next year, that number explodes. And that number, I know, explodes just by the data that the other Butler County school districts have shared with us.
Before we take questions, I do want to emphasize several different things that I think are critical. First,
who did I steal that from?
This is not about parents' choice or the parents' right to choose. We believe in that. We absolutely do. Secondly, this is about not just Hamilton, but every public school district in the state of Ohio. Every public school system, 426 districts are going to be impacted by this next year, and I anticipate even more if the system doesn't change in the following year. So this is not just about the city of Hamilton or Hamilton City Schools. It's much broader than that. The third piece, and I think it's a critical piece, because I've used a ton of analogies, and I do believe that if you're going to absolutely shop for choice, then the accountability measures have to be the same in order to do a comparison on where those dollars are going and the performance of that particular institution as opposed to where the dollars are coming from. Right now, we have all the accountability on one side, and I don't know what the accountability is on the other side. We don't have the same metrics, so it's very difficult to measure performance based off the fact that there are metrics on one side and not the other. There has to be an equitable solution financially that does not harm public schools. There has to be. Because at the end of the day, what we're going to be doing is taking dollars away from public schools, which will result in a loss of services and/or programs for public school students. And that is a major problem with me. We have thriving fine arts programs, athletics programs, extracurricular programs. We've worked hard with our academic programming and done a lot of things to work well, that works great with kids. And I would hate to see some of those opportunities taken away, reduced, or completely eliminated due to financial woes associated with not only the EdChoice vouchers, but the whole school funding system. So what we're asking is that anyone that is concerned, in your packet, you have a list of legislators. You have senators and representatives. We're encouraging you to email them with your concerns. Put that out there. Become active as citizens, because that is what this is going to take. It's going to take parents, it's going to take community members, it's going to take educators to reach out with those concerns. Because without your voice and without those voices, I don't think change will take place. And I think that that's a critical piece to this, is that it's going to take a grassroots effort from parents, from educators, from all of those entities. And this is not about choice. This isn't about private versus public, because I think choices for kids, some of those choices are good for the private schools for some of our kids. Some of those choices, it's better for that student to go to public school. But I don't know what those metrics are to be able to make that decision. And if I'm sitting there as a parent, it's very difficult to make that decision without comparison data. And so those are the things to consider as we summarize what we've gone through tonight. The financing piece is rather confusing and challenging, and school finance is a challenging component to this, but we tried to give you a real quick crash course in what's going on with that. I am always available via phone, email, whatever, to take additional questions. I will sit down and talk with anybody that would like to speak more about this. But any action that you can provide, any communication that you can provide from your neighbor, your friends, other folks, to communicate with legislators and communicate those concerns is something that would be beneficial. And I want to leave with this. Choice is a good thing. Accountability is a good thing. But in order to have choice, you have to have accountability on both sides. And right now, that is a strictly flawed metric that we are using. And I just want everyone to understand that this isn't about Hamilton City Schools and the choice of private versus public. This is about having equitable solutions and equitable metrics in order to make a good choice. So thank you again for coming out this evening, and please reach out to us if you have any additional questions.